Okay, so we are now continuing with our Ezekiel videos. We have read through the first 11 chapters of Ezekiel. We are now in chapter 12. This is still part of this. Okay, so we've had the sections of Ezekiel are actually broken apart according to dates. Ezekiel gives us the courtesy of having dated his visions, and he arranges his visions mainly according to chronology and the order in which he had them. He's unique amongst the prophets in that regard. Except for a little section in the middle of the book which has to do with the nations around Israel. That section isn't actually arranged according to date. He's more like the typical Hebrew prophet in that regards. But the stuff about Jerusalem and the prophecies about his own people, those are actually dated, and they're arranged according to their date. And so we started off at the beginning of the book in the 5th year of their captivity. Ezekiel was taken captive in the second wave. Nebuchadnezzar came upon Jerusalem 3 separate times. Daniel, the prophet we're going to read next, was taken in the first wave, and that was about 605 or so BC. And then Ezekiel was taken in the second wave, which was in 597 BC, which was also the year Nebuchadnezzar took the young king Jehoiachin, who was only 18 years old at the time, and held him on the throne for 3 months, took him captive to Babylon. Ezekiel was and that was the wave where they took a lot of the leading men of the city, a lot of the best. They had already taken some of them a few years earlier. That was when Daniel went. But now in Ezekiel's day, his wave was in 597. And that's the one about which Jeremiah, who stayed in Jerusalem, was told that God considered the captives who were taken first to be the better crop. He was given this vision of the 2 baskets of figs, 1 basket of good figs, 1 basket of bad figs, and God told Jeremiah that God, considered the people who were taken into captivity first to be the basket of good figs. They were, compared to the people left in Jerusalem, they were the better crop. Ezekiel is one of them, and he's there with other members of that crop of good figs. Now, they're stubborn and rebellious, and they're not in a good place mentally or spiritually. But God does see them as a better crop of figs, and eventually, 50 years from now, they're going to repent and return to God. The people left in Jerusalem were the bad figs, and we saw as Jeremiah concluded his story, they ended up going down to Egypt and ended up going basically extinct. They did not listen to God even after the invasion happened and was over. They disobeyed him all the way up to the end, and they went down to Egypt, and God said, I'm going to follow you down there and destroy you there. And that wasn't, okay, so anyway, so Ezekiel was taken captive in 597 BC, and his first vision was dated to the 5th year of that captivity, which would be our calendar years, I don't know the exact dates, but 5 years later, so 592 or so BC. And we're going to be following along as we get closer and closer to the actual fall of the city and then afterwards. And then we saw another vision beginning in chapter 8, which was in the 6th year of their captivity, so about a year later. And Ezekiel saw the glory of God again with the chariots and the cherubim, God's chariot being carried by the cherubim and the wheels and all that. And at the end of chapter 11, and Ezekiel was brought in a vision. His body was still in Babylon, but he was brought in a vision somehow to Jerusalem and shown things in Jerusalem in a vision. And in this vision, he saw the glory of God in the form of this being on top of this chariot depart the temple, kind of lifted up from the temple, then went to go stand on the temple gate or something, and then went to a mountain east of the temple, and then from there he's left the temple. So God has left Jerusalem, and then Ezekiel comes back to his senses. I don't know what it's like to have a vision from God like this. I don't know if you were around other people and they saw, I don't know what you would look like. I don't know what they would see. If you were having a vision, like, would you go into a trance? Would you be like in a hypnotic state? I don't know. I've never experienced this. Only a few men in all of history have ever experienced this, and they've all been dead for thousands of years. So there's nobody left who you can actually ask to give you a first-hand account of what it's like to go into a vision from God, or to have someone around you watch you. I don't know. If he was in front of a crowd, what did it look like to them that he was doing? Was he just standing there stunned? Or did it all happen in a blink of an eye and nobody knows the difference? I don't know. I do not know. Never had it happen to me. Never had it happen to anyone that I know that I can personally ask what it was like. All I have is the account of the handful of times that ever happened to anyone that are left for us in written form here in the Bible. Anyway, So we get into chapter 11 with the account of God's glory leaving Jerusalem. He didn't go very far. All we saw him go to was the mountain east of Jerusalem. But, he's in Babylon now with Ezekiel and the captives there. So symbolically, even though we didn't see him go very far, he just left the city to go to a mountain nearby, that was still seismic enough to Ezekiel to communicate the point. Now, to us today, this doesn't seem like that big of a deal, because we've been conditioned for 2,000 years of church history to believe that God's presence is not limited to a single space, that he does not have to reside in a temple or a tabernacle or an Ark of the Covenant or whatever, and that he is not geographically bound to a certain location. Like, we've been imprinted with this idea for 2,000 years. Even people who don't believe in God have this concept are aware of this concept of the all-seeing God. They reject it, of course, but that's what we believe today. Even people who don't believe in God believe the God they don't believe in is a God that can see everything anywhere. That's not the God that the ancient people thought of. Even Ezekiel, who wasn't a faithful Israelite, who was going to be a priest if his life had turned out differently, Ezekiel didn't think of God as an all-present God. Ezekiel starts off his ministry in Babylon thinking that God is still in Jerusalem. So God has to show Ezekiel this vision of himself, God, arriving in Babylon in the form of this chariot to meet Ezekiel. And then he shows him the vision of himself leaving Jerusalem and then taking Ezekiel back to Babylon. Again, it's hard for us to understand how significant an impression that this would make itself on Ezekiel, because Ezekiel, despite being a faithful Hebrew priest, did not necessarily conceptualize God as being the all-present, ever-seeing God that we can see him being. Okay? We've had 2,000 years now of church history to spread around the world and teach the concepts of the omnipresent, omniscient God. In Ezekiel's day, that concept hadn't necessarily been understood by the people yet. Even the faithful Hebrews still, to a large degree, thought of God as being a God, a geographical God, a provincial God, a God who was the God of Israel, who fought the gods of the nations around them. And God is part of the revelation of God that we're seeing unfold here throughout time, is demonstrating to the Israelites and to the nations around them that this God is much more than just that. Now, God could have made that clear from the very beginning. Okay, He could have created Adam and Eve with the knowledge of that already in them. I'm guessing He did do that for the angels, but but He didn't. He chose not to do that with Adam and Eve or with mankind in general. I guess because He'd already. It's like that was His choice. He chose to make man intelligent and with the capacity to be more intelligent, but without necessarily knowing all this about God, so that He could reveal it to him over the course of time. Again, why He didn't just make man with all the knowledge about God? Well, I guess that would make us basically the same as the angels, where you're just that way forever. I don't know. If you knew that to begin with, I guess you wouldn't have any potential for growth or capability for development. And I also believe, and I'm getting kind of on a tangent here, I don't think that when we get to heaven, as we talk about today, I don't even think then we'll know all about God. I think we'll spend all of eternity learning more about God. Anyway, this is actually still part, so the next several chapters, so I finished last time at the end of chapter 11, which was, I thought, a fitting finish because it ended the vision of God leaving Jerusalem. But the next several chapters go with those last couple chapters. They're all part of under the heading at the beginning of chapter 8, where he says, in the 6th year, in the 6th month, and the 5th day, while I was sitting in my house, and the elders of Judah were sitting before me. Okay, like all of this stuff up to, I think, about like chapter 20 or something like that, goes in that section. So I ended my reading last time in the middle of a section. It was a natural thematic finish, because it ended with Ezekiel's vision being brought to, he finished his vision, he came back to his senses, he was back in his house again, and he saw the glory of the Lord leave Jerusalem. But he actually has more to say that goes along with this vision that we read about in Ezekiel chapters 8 through 11. Took me 10 minutes just to get started. I'll go ahead and read one chapter and then I'll start a new video. Ezekiel 12. The word of the Lord came to me. So presumably, as he's still sitting there in his house of the elders, I mean, it may have been a few weeks or months later, but we're not going to get our next dated section until chapter 20, so presumably all the stuff between chapters 12 and 19 fit together in the context of this vision that was introduced in chapter 8. So the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, or human, you are living among a rebellious people. They have eyes to see, but do not see, and ears to hear, but do not hear, for they are a rebellious people. We've heard that imagery before. We saw that. Isaiah had a lot to say about that. Isaiah went back over and over and over again to the eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear imagery. That's how his call started, and that's how he continued talking about them all the way through his ministry. And now Ezekiel is picking that theme up. We've heard that mentioned before in other prophets as well. Therefore, Son of man, God is still speaking, pack your belongings for exile. So he's going to be demonstrating, this is going to be another, more instructions for a visual demonstration to the people of what he's supposed to do, like a play actor, like acting out these scenes in front of them so they see what he's doing. So pack your belongings for exile. And in the daytime, as they watch, set out and go from where you are to another place. I don't know where, from where to where, but he was walking from one spot to another in the town. Perhaps they will understand while carrying some sort of exile bag on his shoulder, whatever that looked like. Now, he's already been in exile. Okay, he and the other Israelites with him would have been forced to make this walk from Jerusalem to Babylon a few years ago. So he knows what it's like to have to do this. Perhaps they will understand, although they are a rebellious house. During the daytime, while they watch, bring out your belongings packed for exile. Then, in the evening, while they are watching you, go out like those who go into exile. While they watch, dig through the wall and take your belongings out through it. So there is some sort of diggable wall, I guess an earthen wall, must not have been stone, that he was supposed to, I presume, dig through with his hands, I guess. Put them on your shoulder as they are watching you and carry them out at dusk. Cover your face so that you cannot see the land. I guess something like this or something, I'm not sure exactly. For I have made you a sign to the house of Israel. So I did as I was commanded. During the day I brought out my things packed for exile. Then in the evening I dug through the wall with my hands. I took my belongings out at dusk, carrying them on my shoulders while they watched. I'm guessing this was a one-time thing. It doesn't seem as though he's doing this, I don't know. Again, this is another example of him acting out his prophecies in front of the people. And these are people who are in exile, so they're familiar with the idea of the exile walk. Packing your bags and walking out in exile. They've done this. In the morning, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, did not that rebellious house of Israel ask you, what are you doing? Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. This oracle concerns the prince in Jerusalem and the whole house of Israel who are there. Say to them, I am assigned to you. As I have done, so it will be done to them. They will go into exile as captives. So he's talking to people who are already captives, who are already in exile, who have already experienced this. They had their exile walk a few years ago. But he's telling them that the people who are still in Jerusalem, including the king, are going to have that happen to them too. The prince among them, that would be Zedekiah, will put his things on his shoulder at dusk and leave. And a hole will be dug in the wall for him to go through. Now we read about this in Jeremiah and in Kings and Chronicles, that Zedekiah did attempt to flee the city after he had been broken into at night by escaping through a hole in the wall, and they caught him. He could not get very far. They caught him and brought him to the king at Riblah, the king of Babylon, who was stationed at Riblah. He will cover his face that he cannot see the land. I'm not entirely certain if that means Zedekiah himself covered his face, or if that refers to him being blinded by the king of Babylon so that he can't see anything. Doesn't really make sense that someone who's trying to flee, now he may be trying to disguise himself, He may be putting on some sort of mask or veil or something to disguise himself. And maybe in the process of doing so, he hinders his own vision. Maybe. I don't really know. I will spread my net for him, and he will be caught in my snare. I will bring him to Babylonia, the land of the Chaldeans, but he will not see it, because he'll be blinded, and there he will die. I will scatter to the winds all those around him, his staff and all his troops, and I will pursue them with drawn sword. We read about this already in Jeremiah and historical books. They will know that I am the Lord, when I disperse them among the nations and scatter them through the countries. This is the 6th year of these people's current exile. So we're about 5 years away from this happening to the rest of the city. This would be about 591 or so BC, and the city will finally fall for good in 586 BC, so about 5 years from now. They will know that I am the Lord when I disperse them among the nations and scatter them through the countries. But I will spare a few of them from the sword, famine, and plague, so that in the nations where they go, they may acknowledge all their detestable practices. Then they will know that I am the Lord. So he's going to leave some of them alive, so they can be a witness to their own wickedness. We saw that happen in the people in Jerusalem. The survivors who stayed in the land and interacted with Jeremiah at the end of Jeremiah, they weren't any better than they were before. The experience didn't chasten them or cause them to repent or change their ways. If anything, they became even more determined to do evil. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, or human, tremble as you eat your food, and shudder in fear as you drink your water. Again, he's demonstrating something to the people. So he's supposed to be eating and drinking publicly, obviously, and while he's doing it, he's shaking and shuddering and acting as though he's in fear and terror. Say to the people of the land, this is what the sovereign Lord says about those living in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. They will eat their food in anxiety and drink their water in despair. For their land will be stripped of everything in it because of the violence of all who live there. The inhabited towns will be laid waste, and the land will be desolate. Then you will know that I am the Lord. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, what is this proverb you have in the land of Israel? The days go by, and every vision comes to nothing. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm going to put an end to this proverb, and they will no longer quote it in Israel. Say to now, what this means, the days go by, and every vision comes to nothing, basically means time has gone on. We've been hearing the prophets talk about this over and over again for over 100 years, and it still hasn't happened. When's it going to happen? We don't think it's going to happen. That's what it means. They're basically expressing doubt that God will follow through on his threats and his warnings that he's been giving to people for hundreds of years. And he's saying, I'm going to put an end to that. You're not going to say that anymore. I've given you all this time to repent. You haven't done it, I'm going to put an end to that. These days are going to come to an end. What I have said I will do, I will do. Say to them, the days are near when every vision will be fulfilled. For there will be no more false visions of flattering divination or flattering divinations among the people of Israel. We've already read in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah that they had people, both in Babylon and in Jerusalem, who were prophesying peace and security for the people, and not the truth which God had in mind, which is going to be destruction and bloodshed. He's going to put an end to that. The false prophet's message of false peace and false security is going to be brought to an end. But I, the Lord, will speak what I will, and it shall be fulfilled without delay. For in your days, you rebellious house, I will fulfill whatever I say, declares the sovereign Lord. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, the house of Israel is saying, the vision he sees is for many years from now. And he prophesies about the distant future. It's not going to happen in there, no. We're not going to see it. Again, that's what they've gotten so far. These people are used to getting pushed to the brink and then managing to avoid going over the brink. And this has been going on pretty much since they got, well, we read about this in the book of Judges. We read about this happening several times in the span of several hundred years in a few pages in the book of Judges. You know, they've been conditioned, they've been used to this pattern of pushing God just up to the brink and then backing away at the last moment, and God relents and spares them for another generation or two. And they've been doing that for like 800 years now. And I think they're going to be able to do it again. I think, again, we read about this and we read Jeremiah's interactions with Zedekiah at the end. You know, God did come to their rescue in the days of Hezekiah, 130 years earlier. The Assyrians were camped around the city much like the Babylonians are now. The Egyptians even came out to meet them, and the Assyrians went to go deal with them, like the Babylonians did. So I believe that in Jerusalem, in the people, in Zedekiah's mind, they thought they were going to be able to do that again. They thought that God was going to once again bail them out of a jam, and this time He's not going to do it. Therefore say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. None of my words will be delayed any longer. Whatever I say will be fulfilled, declares the sovereign Lord. Alright, let's go ahead and start a new video.